So, Kylie, well, thank you for, Kylie Lewis is on our second podcast, or third, or we don't know what kind of podcast, where we're at number-wise, where we're going to be at, but we're at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, are you from the Rockford area, or?
Yes, I was born and raised in Rockford.
Okay.
My whole life. Moved a lot, but always in the Rockford area.
Okay. And then graduated from what high school?
Harlem.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So that.
Yeah.
And what year did you graduate?
08.
08. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit older than you. So I graduated in 86.
So you went to Harlem too?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
And then I went back later on and worked at Harlem.
Right.
And so actually just recently I've been doing some talks back at Harlem for a couple different things. One is wellness, and then also some of the suicide awareness piece that I'm working on.
Right.
So, well, before we get into too far, because as I've talked about, I've really wanted this podcast to be about getting to know people and getting to know their story of transformation. And I know you've had a story of transformation as well.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into that, so what does Kylie do for fun? If you're gonna not be doing all the different things that you're involved with, what do you do for fun?
For fun. I think it really changes. Like,
Okay.
And when I say that, I mean like season to season even.
Okay.
Because fun for me used to be so extravagant. Like
Okay.
it had to be such a high of like,
Okay.
well, for fun, I go out to a concert and it has to be like elaborate. And now fun is so simple. It's like, I watch TV with my boyfriend at night.
Okay.
Like that's fun for me.
Okay.
And so spending time with my boyfriend, spending time with my family, and connecting with women. Like
Okay.
that's fun for me. Like having a girls' lunch where we get into like deep conversation, that is my favorite thing to do.
I can definitely appreciate that part. If I'll get to whatever kind of social gathering it is, if I'll count the night as a good night if I can get into some level of depth of conversation. If it's all superficial conversation, no matter how good the food is or whatever the entertainment is, I'm like, it was okay. But if I can have if I can learn more about somebody, get to know someone more, or just get to know something about them more because of the conversation, all right, that one counts. That's a good one. So
Totally agree.
So tell me a little bit. You graduated from Harlem in 08, and what was kind of like, if you think back to then, that was a few years ago, right? And so
10 years ago. Exactly 10. Yeah.
So what was as you think back, what was your focus? What was a 10-year-old version of you, that 17, 18-year-old girl? What was your main focus?
My heart is beating fast when I think about that. So much comes up because I think, as probably many 18-year-old girls, I didn't have a clue what my focus was.
Okay.
I'm very much into, like, if you see me now or if you see my life now, I'm very artistic. But back then, it was just kind of something I did at school that people knew that I was good at, like for fun, or in class I got good grades in art. But that was definitely not a focus of mine.
Okay.
I think I knew at that point when I was graduating that almost all of my friends were going away to school. Okay. And I knew that I was not. So I already started to feel a little bit lost and a little bit behind. Even though I was going to go to Rock Valley, a community college, I just felt like I was already behind because I wasn't going to go away to a university.
So the decision to go to Rock Valley, I went to Rock Valley too, and so and I know my decision was influenced by a couple different things. So what influenced you to go to Rock Valley, the community college, versus going away like all your friends? What was?
I think there's a few different variables that played a role. One was that I didn't have a distinct major. Like, I didn't know why I was going to school. Okay. So personally, I felt like I didn't want to waste my parents' money because I was like, well, if I go away to school, I don't even know what I'm going for. So I should probably start small, right? And just kind of ease my way into it. But also my older sister, she went away. And she knew she was going for nursing. So I think there was always this huge difference between my sister's clarity of what she wanted to do since she was like 10 years old was to follow in my mom's footsteps of being a nurse. And so I I definitely envied her clarity, but I knew I did not want to be a nurse.
Okay.
So it's not like I could just jump on that
Sure.
to get the clarity.
Yeah.
So I think I stayed back and I went to community college because I was just curious,
Yeah.
and I was also just not certain, so I didn't want to waste anyone's money.
Okay, sure.
That was a huge reason.
So that during that time period, and I know a lot of times, like for me, I was actively involved. I was competing as a bodybuilder. I was going to Rock Valley, but I was also working. So at that time, were you going to school? Were you doing other things at that time? Were you working? Were you involved with other activities? What were you doing at that time? Besides, not just besides, but a lot of times there's opportunity when you're going to a community college to be working, doing other things, because school is just part of it, not the...
Right. I think that was around the time that I was working a couple different jobs.
Okay.
I worked at Dairy Queen. I worked at Save-A-Lot.
Okay.
I worked at like an indoor sports center where I started to like manage things. So I was definitely filling my time, but
Okay.
there was nothing that I was working toward, I would say, on the side. A lot of it was me going to visit my friends at colleges so I could experience the university life.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would say there was nothing that I was really working toward. It was more so experiencing, which was fun. I got to go and visit, friends and get really drunk and make a lot of bad decisions, but I felt like I was experiencing college without actually having to be away at college.
Okay.
But a year into that, I felt kind of like, okay, the Rock Valley thing isn't enough for me, and I need to do something more.
Okay.
And that's when I came across an internship at Disney World.
Really? I never knew about that. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that was kind of my next step in my life. So I think I was a freshman in college, and it was partially to do with Rock Valley. They would give you like 6 credits or something, like really small. Which is not why I did it at all.
Yeah.
But I got to move, and I had a purpose. So instead of going away to school and wasting money, I got to move to Orlando and work at Disney World, which as a little girl growing up, of course, I was obsessed with Disney.
Sure.
And I went multiple times when I was little. So this was like a dream. And I also had a couple girls that went to Harlem that were older than me, 2 girls in particular that went, and they were both princesses at Disney.
Okay.
So that's what I saw myself doing at Disney. And they held an audition in Chicago.
Okay.
My dad took me, and it was like a full day thing from like 8 in the morning till 8 at night. And I had to dance and sing and act and all these different levels of the audition experience.
Okay.
And so then they would like cut you out, you'd get cut throughout the day, and I made it all the way through the day. So that was like good news.
Yeah.
But then at the end, they basically told me that I was not the right height for a princess because it's very specific.
Yeah.
So I was too tall for one of the princesses, too short for another, and they're like, sorry. And that was literally it. It was just sorry. You can't be a princess. So that dream was shattered right there.
You can't be a princess.
You're not a princess. You're not fit for a princess.
I think I just got stabbed.
Yeah. And it's funny to look back on all of it because that's a common thread, I think, throughout my journey and throughout my story, which I've now found is really relatable. Like a lot of women can relate.
Sure.
And probably men too. But just searching for that validation that I matter and that I'm good enough. And that was definitely the start of me feeling like, I was seeking that external validation, and I got denied.
Yeah. Okay.
And I still wanted to go to Disney, so I decided to they had an option for you to just do an over-the-phone interview, and then you could just go there and work, and they would just put you in a position.
Okay.
So I decided to do that because I really had my heart set on going to work at Disney, even if I couldn't be Cinderella.
Sure.
So I decided to go. I moved down there. You live in the apartments that Disney owns, and you basically make minimum wage, and then you pay almost your entire paycheck to live in the building that they make you live in. So I was making little to no money at all, living with a group of girls. One girl was actually from Rockford, so that was cool. She also went to Harlem.
Okay.
But this was my first time away from home, so it was really scary, really fun also. But it was just, an experience for me to be at Disney World working, and the position that they ended up putting me in. My best friend loves to tell this story because she loves to tell people that I wanted to be Cinderella, and I ended up wearing a spacesuit and selling turkey legs at a concession stand.
Okay.
So that's the truth.
Okay.
So that's what I did for about 3 months, and I signed a contract for about 6 months.
Okay.
And I really didn't like the experience of working there.
Sure.
Simply because I just have this sense of, when I'm done experiencing something, or I've finished getting what I can get from it, which may have not been true. I'm sure I could have soaked up more knowledge or experience or whatever it is. But I just felt like it was done teaching me what it needed to teach me after 3 months.
Right,
because
okay.
I was just simply standing at a cash register for sometimes 10 hours a day, selling turkey legs.
Gotcha.
So I left early.
And I imagine, just as I've gotten to know you over time, I imagine even at that age, the interaction of just exchanging, turkey leg merchandise, and the conversation being fairly limited, and the impact or just the relational part was probably minimal because everybody's there to be entertained and they're on vacation or whatever. So I imagine that I could see how that would pretty quickly run its course.
Yeah.
So then what happened after that? What'd you do after that?
So I came home after the 3 months, and I think also that experience of coming home was an interesting thing because to me I felt like I kind of failed when I told my parents I wanted to leave. And
what would have been success?
Well, to give you an example, the girl that I went down there with from Rockford, she still lives in Florida. Okay. And she stayed working at Disney for years. Okay. So a lot of the people that go and work at Disney move their way up, and then they get into management or just, they basically make a career out of it. Okay. So part of me maybe thought that was like a beginning of my career. Okay. So I was searching still for that purpose. Okay. And when I said I was giving up and then it wasn't my thing and I was coming home, I felt like I was a little kid still. Okay. And my family loves me and they wanted me home. So of course they're like, sure, we'll help you move out. We'll come down and we'll pack your stuff for you. Which I was grateful for in a sense. But I also felt like, great, I'm still a kid. Yeah. Okay. So, and I very much can identify with that idea of not knowing for sure what success would be, right? But the idea that I know I haven't achieved it, and it's something that I missed again, something that happened. So I get that piece, and maybe it is, like you said, the ones that stayed and made a career out of it, but because we haven't talked to them, they may not have considered that a success because they still either weren't the princess or they just did it because the fear of coming home unfulfilled, right? And and so you went through that experience early on. I mean, and so then what was the next part of the journey? I think an important piece to tell here is that when right before I went down to Florida, I actually met what was then my first boyfriend, my first real relationship ever. So I didn't date in high school. My sister did, and I kind of watched her go through a difficult relationship experience. So I kind of just stayed away from relationships. So when I met this person, he was living in Florida. So when I was living in Orlando, I would drive back and forth between Orlando and where he lived, which was a couple hours. And then he ended up moving up to Rockford to live with me and my mom. So I'm 19 years old in my first real relationship, which was 2 years long. We lived together. We worked together. We shared a car. And eventually it was, I think, if everyone's an illusion, if every relationship is just a mirror for us to learn from, that relationship and his personality was showing me everything that I was afraid of in myself. Which was destructive behaviors, eating junk all the time, being maybe what I felt was lazy, not having that purpose, and he was okay with it. and in maybe a great way that worked for him.
Yeah.
But I think in a really beautiful way, it showed me what I didn't want.
Yeah.
And that was to just be content with going to work at a bar and going to, drive through somewhere for dinner and just chill out.
Okay.
It made me like crazy inside. So eventually I had to end that relationship.
Sure. Yep.
And I think from that, I felt like this burst of energy of like a rebirth after 2 years of dating, I guess, at such a young age. And the way that I used that energy kind of sent me into what is the next step.
Okay.
Which was still seeking external validation.
Right. You said something interesting, and I think, and you put it great, this idea that the people in our lives can very well mirror back to us things that maybe we need to work on, right? And then especially young, when things, maybe not young, anytime in our life when we're at that raw standpoint of our life, the individuals will appear, and we gravitate toward them because there's a comfort level, right? And there may be even an acceptance level, that comfort level, and or maybe familiar is probably a better word. But if that's only that part that's undeveloped in us, or it's our shortcut, then at some point it won't fit for us. We have to end that relationship. We have to move on. We have to end that job. It does okay for a time period, but it's not the answer. Mm-hmm. So what happens? So that relationship ends, and all relationships, no matter if they're the right ones or the wrong, whatever, it's not easy, right? Because you question yourself and all those things. But you've shared a couple times now. You've said this idea of seeking purpose, and there was a couple things that you knew what you didn't want, but you didn't know for sure what you wanted. Mm-hmm. And so there was this, I'm seeing this picture of you on this journey of, all right, where do I fit into the world? What's my specific, what am I supposed to be doing? And so I know that today, right, it seems like you're in a much more moving in that direction. So 2 questions. One, why don't you give us just a little bit of, all right, what is that today that you spend a lot of time doing? And then what was that thing that, maybe it was that relationship, maybe it was something else. What were the kind of the transformational things that allowed that to happen?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll start with the first one then. Right now, I would say that, and I actually wrote this down yesterday, that I'm remembering that my only purpose is to love and to be loved.
Okay.
And if I would have said that 5 years ago, I'd be like, girl, you are crazy.
Sure.
What are you talking about?
Sure. Yeah.
And I felt that all along. I think we all do. Like, it almost puts tears in my eyes, because it's like, it's so it's so basic, mm-hmm. right? And it's so obvious,
right.
But it's so true.
Yeah.
And if you really can remind yourself, and I say remind very intentionally, because you forget over and over again. Yeah. And that's what any negative emotion feels like, is you forgetting that your only purpose is to love and be loved.
Not to interrupt you, but a couple years ago I was meditating. It was a Saturday morning I was meditating, and that's what came to me. What you just said was what came to me, was this idea of, because I think I was searching. It was during a time period when I was in transition career-wise, and this idea of, okay, God, what do you want me to do next? What's my next? How am I supposed to evolve? What am I supposed to evolve into? And clearly the message was, you just have to allow yourself to be loved and to love. Mm-hmm. And then, like, a week later, 2 weeks later, whatever, a month later, I ended up going to a men's conference at, I think it's called City First now, it used to be the old First Assembly, and they had a speaker named Bob Goff who wrote a book called Love Does. And in this whole, I hadn't read the book, and that was what that message was about. So it solidified what the message I got, and similar to what you said, I think they're so easy to lose track, or what is that to allow yourself to be loved and to love? What is, because it's to me it's more fluid than it is steps, right? It's messy, and it's not
right.
So
yeah, I mean, when you say that, I think about actually a book called Open Wide, which I've not read, but I listened to Melissa Ambrosini is her name, her podcast.
Okay.
So I understand what the message of the book is, and that is this feeling. I mean, I agree that idea of to love or to be loved is very fluid, so it's hard to really pinpoint what does that mean. But I think on a physical level, like in the body, you can feel what it means to either love or to be resistant to love. And that feels, when you feel loving or open to love, you're literally open. Like your shoulders are broad. Yeah. Your breath is deep and full in your diaphragm. Your face is relaxed. Your jaw is not clenched. And then the opposite is also true. If you're feeling afraid, if you're feeling in fight or flight or resistant to love, you'll feel contracted physically. Yeah. So I think that for people who maybe don't understand what does that mean, or they think it's woo-woo or something weird that some girl that does yoga and meditates says, on a very basic, tangible level, it is a physical feeling, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've been teaching some classes on for educators on how for self-care, and we talk about that, not about necessarily the love piece, but about the idea that when we're in that fight or flight, then we're going to be more sensitive to overstimulation, more sensitive to other things, and just like you just described, we're going to be constricted. But when we are in that space where we're more open, we can be more, in particular with that audience, they can be more open to what their students are bringing them, what is happening, and be more of in a creative process. So yeah, I agree with you. I definitely think there is a physical element to that. So when we're in a relationship or in a situation where either a real fear or a projected fear, my perception is my reality, and so if I fear that this person, is not in it the same way I am, or I'm unsure, I think I'm not feeling loved. I may want that. I want this person to love me like how I care for them, but I may not be experiencing because I'm fearful all the time. And I know that's been my experience in previous relationships, or even at the beginning of my relationship with my wife now. I don't know if I knew this is who I was supposed to be with, but I don't know if I trusted. So that love and that trust were walking hand in hand until I could wrestle with that. So. All right, so we got off on a tangent.
Yeah, which I was going to say, that's a whole nother conversation that I've experienced. So the second thing you asked me was, how did I get here? Like with what you're doing now, you're teaching art classes, as you mentioned, and working with women and teaching yoga, and what was, if there was, I know there's multitude of things, and especially now looking back on it, there's a lot of things. But what would be one or two things as you transitioned from who Kylie was 10 years ago in high school, not knowing, where now it seems to be, at least from an outsider, you seem to have more of a sense of purpose and direction. And so where was, we were talking earlier, I was talking to Dalton earlier about this idea of the hero's journey, and I know you're familiar with that to a little bit, Joseph Campbell's work. So what's for you, what was that initiation process, going from not knowing, or at least having a direction of knowing? Yeah, I think it's very distinct of when it happened. And it was about 6 years ago when I continued on that journey of kind of like learning that same lesson until you finally get it. Like how Oprah talks about the universe or God will, whisper in your ear and then tap you on the shoulder and then like throw a brick upside your head, So yeah, that was kind of the experience that I got to was when I went to seek external validation in maybe like a larger stage, so it felt like it had to be it finally.
Okay.
And that was to go on ABC's The Bachelor television show.
Some people would say that's a larger stage than Disney, but other people might argue yes.
Right, yeah.
But sure, no, I understand.
Yeah, and Disney owns it, so I mean, maybe
that is kind of just for a different segment of wannabe princesses, right?
Right. So. It was like the updated princess version, the older version. So either way, I had watched the show for 11 years. It was like a weekly thing.
Yep.
I would sit and watch with my family. So it became like this idea of something totally separate from me. So when I broke that barrier and I actually went and auditioned, and then I was actually cast for the show, which I could obviously go into all the details of that and all the lessons that came up within that experience. And how I realized how naive I was, and the way that I trusted and I shouldn't have, and so many things were learned. But when that didn't go as planned, and if you were to ask me the same thing, why didn't I feel successful with that? That one was a very clear thing. You get a rose, you stay. You don't get a rose, you go home. Yep. There's however many episodes, you can make it, a variation of different amounts of time, and I didn't even make it to the first
past the first round.
Right, so no rose for me, ever. Okay. And then within that, and I think this is important to point out, because to me this was one of my biggest fears, was to be embarrassed.
Okay.
And when I did not receive a rose, I thought my name was called for a rose, so I walked up. Okay. And then he was like, "Oh, I didn't say your name. I said someone else's name." Okay. So for me, that was like one of the worst moments of my entire life, because I just felt so embarrassed, which then tapped into all the reasons why I was seeking external validation in the first place, because I just didn't feel good enough ever. And that really, from that point forward, when I came home from filming that, I began to just unravel. Sure. And I just went deeper into all of the destructive habits that I had already been partaking in. Okay. And it got to a point where I knew that I had to stop what I was doing, or I was probably not going to survive. Physically, emotionally, it just wasn't going well. And I hid it really well, so no one really knew what was going on. Which then led me to my current boyfriend, who was just a friend at the time, was around, and we had been in communication when I was going on the show, so he kind of knew what was going on. But when I came home and time went on and I realized that I needed to make a change, he was the only person, and I mean this with all respect to all of my friends and all of my family, but they had a vested interest in how they would interact with me, and they loved me so much for all of my life that they were incapable of showing me the harsh strength and truth that I really needed at that time. And he, my current boyfriend, Dalton, was the only person that was able to tell me the truth and to demand strength from me in a way that I had never felt before. Okay. And when I felt that connection with him and that strength within him, I knew that I was safe enough to let go of all the destructive habits that I was doing, which was a long list. Sure. So I have my own podcast called Coming Clean, and that's where the name comes from, because within about a week's time, I stopped taking antidepressants. I sold my Land Rover that I thought made me so cool. I donated a bunch of my clothes. I threw away a lot of my makeup. I mean, I just stopped everything, and I could go on, but I just felt like that was really my, maybe that was my initiation. Sure. I was starting fresh.
Right.
And that was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So a lot has happened since.
And I imagine, and definitely hope you'd be willing to come back on and talk more about that, because because we have those moments, and then the last 5 years also probably has a couple learning lessons as well. And so, because it's not easy to let go of those things, because they come back up sideways, regardless if it's some success or whatever it may be. So, Kylie, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing. I know that there's going to be people listening who are going to want to hear more about your story, as well as hear about what you're doing. And hopefully we can have you come back on and share more about what's happening.
I love that.
So thanks again
for having me. Yeah, thanks.
Bye-bye.